The Cubicon Prime is a mid-range Ender 3 style FDM printer with direct drive extruder and inductive bed leveling probe. At around $400, it's not the cheapest printer you'll find on the market, but it has been performing very reliably for me. I just love it when a printer is good enough that you can set it printing and forget it. So I can highly recommend the Cubicon Prime for beginners. I'm James Bruce, you're watching MUO Reviews, and I hope you'll join me as I take a closer look at the Cubicon Prime and whether it's right for you. The printer arrives part assembled. It's not quite as simple as bolt the gantry on. Instead, you also need to attach the head and then plug everything in. And the gantry itself was quite tricky to attach even following the instructions. Instead, I'd suggest putting the screw underneath first so that it can pull the gantry into place. Otherwise, the screws on the side won't go all the way through. Anyway, that said, it took me about an hour to put everything together. And at the end of it, it's clear that we have a very solid, well-made printer. The only slightly disappointing aspect for me is that the cable, the heated bed cable for instance, tends to run on the Z-axis sometimes. The filament comes down and butts up against the main cable bundle to the print head. None of this has presented any problems for me yet. I just would have liked to see a little more care in organising the cables. Alright, let's talk about specs. It's an Ender 3 style design, as I mentioned. The print area is a fairly standard 22 cm square by 25 cm high that we've seen on many printers now. I'd say it's an entry-level size and should be ample for most people, but it's not a massive format printer. It has a textured glass heated print bed, which I found provided incredible adhesion, actually too much sometimes. And it features dual Z-axis motors along with a simple filament runout sensor. Where things start to differentiate from other printers on the market is in the print head. This is an all-in-one custom design from Cubicon. It's very neat, very tidy. The front flips down so you can inspect it and clean if needed. And most significantly is the direct drive extruder. This won't matter so much if you're only printing in PLA and rigid filaments, but once you start trying out flexible filaments like TPU, a Bowden tube, which is the white tube you see on other printers where the extruder is separate from the print head, means that there's a big gap in which the TPU can compress and stretch, which makes extrusion unreliable. It's all so much easier with a direct drive. The interface on the colour LCD touchscreen is nothing revolutionary, but it is very easy to use. You have live adjustments of all axes, in fact, not just Z, which you'll find under the Baby Steps menu. Otherwise, everything is where you'd expect it to be, and there aren't really any quirks to speak of. It's certainly one of the best interfaces I've used yet, with one caveat. Uniquely, this printer has Wi-Fi built in, and it does actually work, sort of. By which I mean it can connect, it can be controlled remotely, but the file upload is so slow that I could have driven 20 miles to my local coffee shop, sat there for an hour, returned home, put the USB stick in the printer, and it would still have been quicker than using the Wi-Fi upload. And that's not because I have slow Wi-Fi, by the way, not at all. So I don't know what the problem is there, but suffice to say, I didn't bother with Wi-Fi apart from testing it initially, and I wouldn't recommend you do either. The printer ships with a USB drive containing a customized branded version of Cura. It is just Cura though, but with preloaded profiles and some sort of plugin. And if you're familiar with Cura, then you need no explanation on how to use it. If you're not, then it's one of the big 3 slicer programs for all 3D printers. Basically, you either use Slicer, no E, Cura, or Simplify 3D, the last option being Premium. And this is the software that will take a 3D model and transform it into machine G-code instructions for how to print it layer by layer, hence it's called a slicer. It slices the model up. I did, however, find that the macOS version had some annoying bugs in it for the particular version of Cura that they supplied. It wasn't able to duplicate models, for instance, or arrange them automatically. It's well documented in the support forums, but it was fixed in the latest version. So I had to contact Cubicon Support, and they were able to supply me with the profile and resources to add to the regular latest version of Cura to fix that. However, that's not included out of the box, so you will need to either use the version they provide or get in touch with support if you need that latest version. Unfortunately, when I swapped over to the official Cura, I also lost the ability to generate thumbnails of the object. So if you are able to stick with their version and don't desperately need the latest version, then you should. Anyway, on to print quality. That's probably the most important thing here, right? Prior to every print, the machine will spend about 5 minutes doing a 16-point self-leveling process. And this is using an inductive sensor, similar to the Prusa pinder probe rather than those horrendous pins that push down, which I've never had any luck with. While admittedly slow, like I say, about 5 minutes in total, the 16-point inductive leveling does seem to work really well. Gives good, reliable first layer results every time. You can still and probably should use the baby step feature just to ensure the correct squish is achieved. The fact it has baby step is very nice compared to some printers I've tried where you left turning dials on the underside of the bed in order to level things out on the fly. My very first prints off the bat with some 6-month-old white PLA came out superbly. It took about 7 hours to print these small Gloomhaven pieces in 0.06 quality, though I did forget to disable the raft, which wasn't really needed. I've also painted them up a bit, so that's perhaps easier to see the imperfections when dry brushed. There's a fair bit of Z-wobble on that setting, but since this is one way in which you would use the machine, I did want to show you the painted results. Next, I downgraded the quality to normal 0.15mm layer height and did these trees and rock support columns. Again, I've painted them up to highlight any misgivings in the textures, and actually, I'm really impressed by the quality here. Standard PLA again, and these two were given a super quick paint job just for tabletop use. I then printed some paint pot holders. Again, reasonable quality, but there is a bit of Z-wobble, and I think at this point the nozzle had got clogged a bit. So next I moved on to TPU, and to be honest, this is the first time I've printed with TPU, and it's both a lot easier and a lot harder. So to start with, I had no issues at all for TPU. Won't suffer from temperature changes causing warping, that sort of thing. As long as you have the extrusion working fine, you should get good results. It does, however, tend to be a lot stringier, purely because it's difficult to retract, so it's best to stick to one object at a time with minimal movements. The hardest part is getting it to extrude right. You want to slow things down a lot. I had to modify the default Cura profile to put it down to 30mm, and even then I ended up taking the print down to 30–40% speed after it had started printing. You also want to ensure that the filament is very free flowing so it won't catch on anything. Definitely use the filament mount above the printer to make that as easy as possible. And it's worth watching the first layer here, because if it starts too close and clogs the nozzle, I found that the filament would push out of the small tube leading into the nozzle, and I'd end up with spaghetti in the print head. So I did get some good prints out of TPU. A neighbour asked me for a big washer for an old sink that she couldn't source anywhere, and it was easy to bash one out. 100% infill, worked great. I did a selection of small plant ties and no tie shoelaces. TPU is surprisingly strong, actually. As long as it's printed at the right temperature, it bonds well and is even watertight in most cases. Then I printed a soap dish, came out pretty well, though the stringing internally is seemingly unavoidable. And at that point I found out that TPU is really rather good at clogging nozzles. So I also got to test out changing the nozzle for the included spare. I just heated it up, pulled out the filament and used the little spanner to unscrew and then screw the new one in. It was remarkably simple, no messing around with heat blocks or taking everything apart, just unscrew, screw back in, done. Boom. I swapped to rainbow PLA for this curious vase. Again, a bit of stringing, looks good from the front, though I could do with tweaking the settings to avoid these lumps where the lines join. This wasn't done in vase mode. As you can see, the problem with vase mode is that you get paper thin, very weak walls, and it's just a waste of filament, really. I also printed this small 100% infill, no support, no adhesion test pattern. And you can see that again, although I got a fair bit of stringing, it did remarkably well on the bridging, even up to 80-degree overhangs, no warping on the base, despite having no adhesion. It's all just really nice. As a final test, I went back to standard white PLA and just fully loaded the print bed with small bits, just jammed them all in, and then I hit print and walked away. And I did this just to demonstrate what I love about this printer, and that's that it just works. You can choose the file, hit print and walk away knowing that actually it's 99% probably going to print great. It's reliable thanks to the auto leveling sensor. It's reasonably good quality, though there is room to tweak and dial things in if you want to, but the hardware is solid. And if all you want is a good, reliable, functional print in a variety of materials, this is a great option. There are no pain points, no frustrating things that I can sit here and complain about. It all just worked. Sure, a customized version of Cura is a bit annoying, but it's only a matter of time before the profiles are rolled into the official app. Sure, the Wi-Fi could be faster, but do you really care? The self-leveling takes a fair while, but that does result in more reliable prints. So these are all very minor issues really. As far as plug-and-play printers go that are suitable for all ages and everyone at variety of skill levels, I think this is extraordinarily good. It reminds me of my old Prusa, in fact. Just good, reliable printing, which is great for beginners and even jaded older tech reviewers who are bored of complicated machines not working properly. Please don't buy a 3D printer that's super cheap that you're going to have to spend ages and inevitably more money upgrading, making safe, unless you really are into that side of hardware tinkering. For me personally, that's just not fun. Being able to print stuff and use that stuff is the fun part, and Cubicon Prime fulfills that promise. It is an excellent mid-range but beginner suitable printer. Alright, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions about the Cubicon Prime, let me know in the comments, because this is going to be my main printer from now on. Hit like if this review helped you, otherwise let me know down in the comments what you didn't like, and do consider subscribing for more reviews, giveaways and more from all of us over at makeusub.com. Till next time.